The Martian dust hung in the air like a permanent wound, suspended beneath the shimmering curvature of the colony dome, tinting everything it touched with the color of old iron. Graham Foster leaned against the railing of his weathered porch, eyes narrowed as the horizon bled from crimson into dull amber. The quiet hum of water recyclers and the rhythmic click of solar panels, rotating toward the artificial sun, were the only sounds for miles. He liked it that way. After 15 years in the Colonial Marines and 5 more in orbital maintenance, he'd earned this solitude, earned the right to speak to no one and answer to nothing but the stubborn life clinging to Mars's rusted skin. His homestead sat on the farthest edge of Lyceum Colony's terraform zone, a rectangle of stubbornness fenced by steel and silence. Inside the dome, the settlers were busy playing politics and pretending they weren't one hull breach away from extinction. Out here, the world was honest. Machines broke. You fixed them. That was enough. But as Graham wiped the grit from his brow and turned toward the sound of footsteps, he knew that peace, fragile and hard-won, was about to fracture Dot. She appeared out of the glare like a vision born of dust and light, Lara, his cerulean housekeeper, moving with her usual careful precision down the gravel path. Her blue skin, almost luminescent under the dome's false sunlight, contrasted sharply with the beige of her uniform. Her silver-white braid swayed neatly between her shoulder blades, and her posture, as always, was impeccable. Yet there was something off in her rhythm today, a barely perceptible falter in her gait, the smallest hitch that no one but a trained eye would notice. Graham's gaze sharpened. Old instincts stirred in his chest like embers catching air. She was limping. Not badly, not enough to draw attention, but it was there. A quiet signal, the kind soldiers used to read before an ambush or after a battle. "Morning, Lara," he called, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Didn't expect you today." She stopped at the base of the steps, inclining her head with that restrained grace that seemed coded into her species. The agency adjusted the schedule. "I thought it best not to inconvenience you, Mr. Foster." He grunted, stepping aside as she entered. The scent of her cleaning solution, faint citrus mixed with something floral and foreign, drifted through the air. She moved with efficient familiarity, already unloading her tools from the small black case she always carried. But Graham's attention stayed fixed on her right leg. Beneath the hem of her skirt, just above the polished boots, he caught a glimpse of white bandage pressed too tightly around a calf that shouldn't have needed one. "You're hurt," he said, voice low but steady. Lara froze mid-motion, then resumed slower this time. "It's nothing, Mr. Foster. A minor injury. It won't affect my work performance." Her tone was polite, professional, but her fingers trembled as she arranged the supplies. Graham's jaw clenched. "Didn't ask about your performance," he said. "Asked about your leg." Silence thickened between them, heavy as Martian gravity. Outside, a dust storm rattled the dome's outer hull, but inside the air went still. Lara straightened, eyes fixed on the coffee maker as though it were the most important task in the universe. "Please," she said softly, "it's not necessary." The way she said it, the quiet plea beneath the words, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this. He didn't press further. Not yet. He'd seen that look before, in refugees after raids, in soldiers who refused to admit they were broken. So instead he leaned against the counter, studying her. "Coffee maker's acting up again," he said. "Mind taking a look?" She nodded quickly, grateful for the diversion, and knelt to inspect the unit. The limp was more obvious now, her movements less fluid, her face tightening whenever her weight shifted to her right leg. Graham watched, feeling something inside him twist. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself he'd left saving people behind a long time ago. When she finally finished and stood, her posture was too perfect, too rehearsed. "The heating coil's stable now," she said. "It should function properly for several cycles." He nodded absently, still staring at the faint line of bruising visible along the edge of her sleeve. She followed his gaze, realizing too late that the fabric had shifted. Quickly, she adjusted it, forcing a brittle smile. "I should be going. I have another appointment." She turned toward the door, movements brisk but brittle, the limp barely hidden. "Take it easy," he said quietly, but she didn't look back. Her voice was almost lost to the wind as she reached the gate. "He'll be angry I'm late." The words hit him harder than any battlefield echo. He stood there long after she'd vanished into the dust, the silence pressing on him like a weight. For years he'd believed he could live apart from the world's ugliness. That belief crumbled with a single whispered sentence. Somewhere beyond the red haze, a storm was rising, and for the first time in years, Graham Foster felt the unmistakable pull of duty awakening inside his chest. The morning after felt heavier than the Martian sky itself. A dim rose-colored light filtering through the dome like the planet was holding its breath. Graham Foster had been awake long before dawn, the rhythmic hiss of the irrigation pumps keeping time with his thoughts. He worked with mechanical precision, tightening valves, checking pressure readings, pretending the quiet routine could drown out the image of Lara's limp. He'd told himself it was none of his business, that her pain wasn't his to fix, but the echo of her words, "He'll be angry, I'm late," wouldn't leave him. It wasn't just pity that gnawed at him. It was something deeper, something older, the instinct that once made him charge through fire for men he barely knew. You could walk away from war, he thought, but war never quite walked away from you. He was crouched by the water recycler, elbow deep in tools, when the perimeter alarm chimed once, sharp and urgent. Graham's head snapped up. The sensor wasn't supposed to trigger unless something crossed the outer boundary, and visitors out here were rare enough to count on one hand. He wiped his hands on a rag and grabbed his rifle before stepping outside into the thinning dawn haze dot at first. He thought it was another false reading. The desert's shifting air sometimes confused the sensors, but then he saw her. A slender figure, staggering along the ridge road that led from the colony proper, moving through the dust with halting, uneven steps. His stomach dropped. "Laura," he muttered, breaking into a run. The closer he got, the worse it looked. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, streaked with dirt, and one side of her face was marred by a deep bruise that turned her pale blue skin to a violent purple. She stumbled once more before collapsing to her knees. By the time Graham reached her, she was trembling, her breath shallow and uneven. "Hey, easy now," he said, dropping beside her, his hand steady, though his pulse was not. She looked up at him through half-lidded amber eyes, dazed and shivering. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." He didn't waste time with questions. "You're safe now," he said, slipping an arm under her shoulders, feeling the heat of her fever through his sleeve. "Let's get you inside." She tried to protest, mumbling something about her husband, about punishment, but he ignored it, lifting her with practiced ease and half carrying, half guiding her across the yard. The dust clung to their clothes like red snow. Inside, he laid her gently on the couch and turned on the heater. The warmth filled the small room as he fetched the medical kit from its shelf. Her breathing was ragged, her skin slick with cold sweat. "Where does it hurt?" he asked, but she only shook her head weakly. When he began cutting through the fabric of her torn sleeve, she flinched. Beneath it, a patchwork of bruises bloomed down her arm, some yellowing, others fresh. Lower, along her ribs, a jagged cut traced across her side, still oozing faintly. "He found out I came here yesterday," she said softly, her voice breaking with shame. "Said I was disgracing him." That I'd developed? Inappropriate feelings. Graham's jaw tightened. He did this? He was angry, she said, as if that explained it, as if the reason mattered. He broke a glass. Used the edge. Her words came haltingly, like confession. He said he'd report me to the Cerulean Council for moral violations if I didn't quit working here. Graham froze, antiseptic wipe in hand. He knew what that meant: banishment, social death, sometimes worse. He swallowed the rage rising in his chest and focused on cleaning the wound, his movements precise but gentle. "You're not going back to him," he said quietly. "I have no choice," she replied. "The marriage contract is binding." "The council? To hell with your council," he snapped, his voice cutting through the small space. "He tried to kill you." She winced at his tone, then sighed, resignation hollowing her voice. "Not kill, just teach." Those words lit something cold and final inside him. When he was done bandaging her, he stood abruptly and crossed the room. She watched in confusion as he opened a cabinet and pulled out a long, dusty case. When he flicked it open, the metallic gleam of an old pulse rifle reflected in the low light. "Graham," she whispered, alarm creeping into her tone. "What are you doing?" He checked the charge, the click of old metal echoing through the quiet. "Something I should have done yesterday." "You can't," she pleaded. "Dren has connections. If you hurt him, the sheriff won't protect you. They'll call it a domestic matter." Graham slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Sheriff's office doesn't protect anyone who needs it most." He turned toward the door. "Rest, you're safe here. I'll be back soon." "Graham, please," she called weakly, her hand lifting as if to stop him. But he was already stepping out into the dust. The dome's filtered sunlight caught the edge of his rifle, painting it gold as he strode away. Behind him, Lara's quiet sob carried no further than the porch, swallowed by the wind. The rancher who had spent years minding his own business now walked toward the colony with the purpose of a man who'd made peace with his past. The soldier was awake again, and Mars, for all its red silence, was about to remember what that meant. The road to the alien sector stretched out like a scar across the Martian plain, dust swirling around Graham's boots as he walked with steady, deliberate purpose. The dome's outer haze burned with artificial dawn. A pale sun filtered through miles of transparent alloy. Ahead, the colony shimmered, Lyceum, a collection of domes and neon arteries, pulsing with life that had forgotten what real silence sounded like. Graham hadn't been there in months. He preferred the edge of the world where the only things that spoke were the wind and the cattle. But as he neared the outer checkpoint, memories of his military years crept back, the weight of the rifle against his shoulder, the taste of adrenaline, the clarity that came when there was nothing left to lose. The Cerulean district lay on the far eastern curve of the colony dome, where alien architecture bent and flowed like glass melted by time. Smooth white shells stacked like coral, doorways shaped not for human sensibility, but for the ceremonial elegance of Lara's kind. Yet this wasn't where he was going. Dren didn't live among the respectable Ceruleans. He had moved his operations to the lower fringe, a place the sheriff's department called the scrapyard, and everyone else called, "Don't go there unless you're armed dot by the time Graham reached the fringe." The air reeked of coolant, ozone, and decay. Neon signs flickered in a half-dozen alien scripts, illuminating the narrow alleys between prefab containers welded together into an imitation of civilization. He passed a pair of Vexians arguing over a broken drone, their eyes glinting like insects under the light. A group of human miners loitered outside a bar, voices hushed when they saw the rifle slung over his shoulder. But he kept walking, face hard, boots crunching on metal grit. Dren's unit wasn't hard to find. Cerulean aesthetics didn't belong in this part of town, and the sight of a curved white door, half buried under scrap metal, gave him away. Graham stopped in front of it and exhaled slowly. The calm before the storm. Then, without hesitation, he kicked. The reinforced door slammed inward with a metallic shriek that cut through the din like a blade. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and stale, intoxicant fumes. 4 figures sat around a makeshift table, 3 aliens he didn't recognize, and 1 he did. Dren looked up lazily from his cards, his deep blue skin catching the light, the purple status markings around his neck pulsing faintly. He smiled slow and mocking. "Well," he drawled, "the human pet owner has come to bark." The other aliens shifted, their eyes narrowing, hands inching toward hidden weapons. Graham fired once into the ceiling. The pulse blast detonated with a deafening crack, sending sparks raining down. "Next one goes through someone's head," he said evenly. Silence followed. Even the hum of the recycler seemed to stop. Dren leaned back, his smile thinning. "I don't know what my wife told you, but—" "She didn't have to tell me," Graham interrupted. "Her face did the talking." Dren's expression flickered between annoyance and disdain. "You humans," he said, standing slowly, "always believing sentiment is virtue. Cerulean females require firm guidance. It's our way." Graham's jaw worked, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "I've met ceruleans who didn't need to break glass to make a point." The biggest of the aliens, a Krell with skin like granite, let out a low growl and took a step forward. Graham's rifle turned slightly. "You really want to try me?" he asked. The Krell froze. Dren's tone shifted, low and dangerous. "You think the sheriff will thank you for this? You're outnumbered, out of your depth." "Maybe," Graham said, "but I don't need the sheriff." He took one more step, the rifle's muzzle now inches from Dren's chest. "You ever lay another hand on her, I'll bury you in this dust." The moment stretched, taut as wire. Then the door hissed open behind him. Graham turned just enough to see a towering figure framed in the doorway, 4 arms, silver scales catching the light. "Deputy Thrick," Dren said smoothly, as if he'd summoned him himself. "Perfect timing. You can arrest this human for threatening a citizen." The deputy's metallic voice vibrated through the room. "Mr. Foster, former colonial marine, ranch owner, never pegged you for trouble." Graham didn't lower his weapon. "Ask him why his wife's covered in bruises." Thrick's upper eyes blinked, the gill vents on his neck flaring. Serious accusation. Dren spread his hands in mock innocence. "My wife is prone to accidents and fantasies. Perhaps she's grown too attached to her employer." The words hit like acid. Graham took a step forward, rifle trembling just slightly, not from fear, but fury barely held in check. "You're a liar, and everyone in this room knows it." Dren's sneer deepened. "Careful, human. You're treading on cultural law." "Cultural law doesn't excuse monsters," Graham snapped. The deputy's gaze shifted between them, calculating. "Domestic disputes are cerulean jurisdiction," Thrick said finally. "But if there's evidence of broader criminal activity—" Graham's eyes flicked toward the back wall, stacked crates, half concealed by tarps. Something about them hummed with faint energy signatures. "You might want to open those," he said. Dren's composure slipped for the first time. "Those are private goods." "Sure they are." Thrick stepped forward, using his lower arms to pull away the tarp. The deputy froze, his compound eyes dilating. Nestled in foam were rows of translucent capsules, each pulsing faintly with organic light. Nexus embryos. Illegal biotech, banned across 3 systems. "By the void," Thrick muttered. The other aliens scrambled for the door, but the deputy moved like lightning, 2 stun batons whipping out to drop the Krell where he stood. Graham held his aim steady on Dren, who had gone pale beneath his blue skin. "Looks like you've got yourself a full house," Graham said quietly. "Smuggling, trafficking, assault. You really hit the jackpot, Dren." Within minutes, more deputies arrived. The room filled with shouting, restraints, and the hum of confiscation drones. Dren was dragged to his knees, still spitting venom. "She's mine," he hissed at Graham. "Under cerulean law, she belongs to me." Graham's reply came like stone breaking. "Not anymore." Thrick turned, all four hands busy securing evidence. "Mr. Foster, you'll need to make a statement. Threatening a citizen with an unregistered weapon is a serious violation, but—" He glanced at the glowing crates. "Circumstances being what they are, I think we can overlook protocol." When Graham stepped outside, the news had already spread. A crowd had gathered, humans, aliens, workers from every corner of Lyceum. Whispers rippled through them like wind through wire. "He's the one who stood up to Dren. He found the smuggler." Someone started clapping, hesitant at first, then others joined, until the sound became a chorus echoing beneath the dome. Graham stared at them, bewildered. He hadn't come for applause. He'd come because a woman had limped across the dust, and no one else gave a damn. But as the deputies led Dren away, heads turning, cameras flashing, one thought burned steady and cold in his chest. If this was what justice looked like on Mars, maybe it was time someone taught the galaxy. How humans handled monsters. The wind outside the dome screamed like something alive that night, dragging long ribbons of red dust across the horizon and rattling the metal fencing that lined the outskirts of Graham Foster's ranch. He sat at his workbench long after sunset, the hum of the irrigation pumps and the soft flicker of the heater casting shadows across the walls. It had been 3 days since the raid in the alien district. 3 days since the sheriff's deputies had hauled Dren and his crew away in restraints while half the colony watched. He hadn't meant to start a movement. He'd only wanted to keep one woman safe. But on Mars, word traveled faster than oxygen through a leak, and before the day was out, people he'd never met were calling him a hero. The quiet rancher who'd stood up to the cerulean underworld. The man who shocked the alien sheriffs. He wanted none of it. Fame didn't fix what was broken. It didn't erase the image of Lara bleeding on his couch, whispering apologies for something that was never her fault. He turned at the sound of soft footsteps. Lara stood in the doorway, wearing one of his spare shirts that hung loose against her slender frame, her blue skin dulled by exhaustion, but healing. The bruise across her cheek had faded to a pale violet. Her amber eyes caught the dim light, steady now where they'd once darted with fear. "You're still awake," she said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. The pumps were acting up again. It was a lie. She seemed to sense it, but said nothing, crossing the room with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They were talking about you in the colony market," she said. "Humans, Ceruleans, even the Vexians. They said you made the sheriffs look like fools." Graham snorted softly. "Yeah, well, fools were all they had to work with." Her smile faded. "Dren's associates won't let this rest, you know. They have pride, connections. He'll come for you." He looked up from the workbench, meeting her gaze. "Let him come. I'm done running from other people's messes." The words hadn't even left his mouth when the alarm cut through the silence. A low, urgent tone that sent both of them spinning toward the monitor. "Perimeter breach," the system intoned. "Multiple signatures detected." Graham was on his feet instantly, the old soldier in him rising to the surface without thought. He crossed to the cabinet, grabbing the pulse rifle and a spare clip. "Stay here," he ordered. Lara followed, ignoring him. No, she was already moving toward the console, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Thermal imaging shows 4 transports approaching from the colony's direction," she reported. "Unmarked." Graham's jaw tightened. Mercenaries. He grabbed his cum device and flicked to the sheriff's frequency. Static, then a distant voice crackled through. Response delayed. Deputies en route. 8 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well have been forever. Outside, the first streak of energy fire cut through the dusk, slamming into the outer defense grid. The ranch's shields flared bright blue, holding, but only barely. Shields at 90%, Lara said, her voice clipped and calm, despite the rising tension. They're trying to overload it. Graham pulled up the tactical map on the secondary display. They'll focus fire on the south quadrant. It's the weakest point. How do you know that? She asked, glancing at him. Because it's what I do, he said grimly. He moved to the weapons locker and handed her a small blaster. You remember how to use this? She hesitated only for a second before taking it. You showed me, she said, and the way she gripped the weapon told him she wasn't the same frightened housekeeper who once flinched at her own reflection. They worked in silence, the room pulsing with the hum of charging capacitors and distant explosions. Graham rerouted power from the storage units to reinforce the shields while Lara activated the emergency lockdown. They're spreading out, she reported. 2 teams circling east and west, 1 staying central. Trying to flank us, he muttered. Then we make it hard for them. He opened the manual controls for the irrigation system and keyed in a command sequence. You're diverting water pressure? She asked, confused. Not exactly, he said. A few taps later, a deep hiss reverberated through the ground. Outside, the dry trenches that crisscrossed the ranch suddenly erupted in dense clouds of steam, venting upward like geysers. Visibility dropped to 0. That should buy us a few minutes. Through the haze of the monitors, he caught her looking at him, her expression unreadable. You've done this before, she said quietly. He gave a small shrug. Different planet, same tactics. The next impact shook the building, and the lights flickered. Shields at 40%. Lara shouted. They're moving in. Graham's voice was low, calm. Good. Let them. He opened the maintenance hatch on the north side of the house. We use the trenches. I'll hit the east flank. You cover the main entrance. If anyone gets through, you fall back to the cellar and seal it. I'm not hiding, she said sharply. The look in her eyes stopped him cold. Not fear, but defiance. The cerulean housekeeper was gone. In her place stood someone reborn from pain and fire. All right, he said, nodding once. Then we do this together. The storm outside was chaos incarnate. Red dust swirled with steam as energy bolts sliced the air, leaving streaks of white light across the night. Graham moved low through the trenches, his rifle steady, the old instincts snapping into place with terrifying ease. He counted 8 silhouettes moving through the Mistvexians and Krell mercs, their armor glowing faintly. He waited until they were close enough to see the whites of their eyes, then fired 3 shots in quick succession. The pulse blast struck true, sending 2 sprawling and the third diving for cover. From the other side of the field came a series of smaller flashes Lara's blaster. He risked a glance and saw her crouched behind a storage tank, firing with precision that made him almost smile. She was holding her own. Minutes felt like hours. The air was thick with smoke, the ground trembling with the impact of stray blasts. South flank breached. Lara's voice came through the cum, breathless but steady. They're heading for the main door. On my way, he said, already moving. By the time he reached the homestead, the central shield had collapsed, and 3 mercenaries were forcing their way inside. He dropped the first with a single pulse shot, the second with a blow from the rifle stock. The third raised his weapon and dropped instantly as Lara appeared behind him, firing point blank. Her braid whipped over her shoulder, as she turned toward Graham. "I told you I wouldn't hide." He managed a grin despite the chaos. "Remind me not to argue with you." The roar of engines cut through the night, vehicles approaching fast. For one terrifying moment, he thought reinforcements for the attackers had arrived, but then the comm crackled. "Hold tight, brother. Cavalry's coming." Eric Neal's voice, Graham's old Marine partner, and behind him, the low thunder of engines, dozens of them. Through the dust, headlights appeared, a convoy of miners, farmers, engineers, all armed, all angry. The mercenaries hesitated. Their formation faltered. "Looks like we've got backup," Graham said. Lara's lips curved into a fierce smile. "You started something bigger than both of us." The mercenaries broke ranks, retreating into the smoke, their courage dissolving as quickly as the steam. In the distance, sirens wailed the sheriff's deputies, finally catching up. Graham lowered his rifle, chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. When it was over, the ranch was a scarred patch of metal and smoke, the air thick with the scent of ozone and burnt soil. Lara stood beside him, her hand trembling only slightly as she holstered her blaster. "You're hurt," she said, noticing a burn along his arm. He looked down at it and shrugged. "Just a scratch." Around them, miners were cheering, deputies shouting orders, and drones circling overhead to capture the aftermath. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the quiet, frightened cleaner who used to bow her head, but a survivor, fierce and unbroken. "We held them off," she said softly, as if she didn't quite believe it. "Yeah," he replied, voice rough but steady. "We did." And though he didn't say it out loud, the truth settled heavy in his chest. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The quiet rancher of Mars had drawn a line in the dust, and the whole colony was watching to see who would cross it next. The next sunrise bled pale gold across the Lyceum dome, its artificial rays cutting through the lingering dust from the night's battle. Smoke curled lazily from the blackened earth around Graham Foster's ranch, and the metallic tongue of spent energy bolts still hung in the air. The quiet that followed felt unnatural, the kind of silence that comes only after violence, when everything still listens for the next shot. Graham stood by the fence, his arm bandaged where a plasma scorch had grazed him, watching deputies comb through the wreckage. Their drones buzzed overhead like metallic insects, scanning for residual heat signatures and discarded contraband. Beyond them, miners and farmers gathered in clusters, talking in low, reverent tones. The story had already spread through the colony, how the quiet rancher and his cerulean maid had stood against mercenaries, how half the outer dome had rallied to his call. To Graham, it didn't feel like heroism. It felt like cleanup after a storm-got Lara emerged from the house behind him, her steps light but sure, her wounds nearly healed. The thin Martian light painted her blue skin in soft hues, her silver braid resting against her shoulder. She carried 2 mugs of spiced tea, her world's blend, steeped in herbs that reminded him faintly of citrus and smoke. "You should sit," she said quietly, handing him a cup. "The medics said you need rest." He smirked faintly. "Rest is for people who didn't just win a war." "We didn't win," she said softly, looking toward the damaged perimeter. "We just survived." He followed her gaze. A line of sheriff's transports shimmered in the distance, dust clouds rising behind them. "They're bringing someone important," he murmured. Lara tensed. The consul. Minutes later, the vehicles arrived in formation. The lead door opened, and out stepped a cerulean male draped in silver-white robes that shimmered like liquid glass. His skin was pale, nearly translucent with age, and his amber eyes carried the calm weight of authority. 2 deputies flanked him, one of them, Deputy Thrick, the same skilled enforcer who'd arrested Dren days earlier. "Mr. Foster," Thrick greeted, his metallic voice echoing across the open yard. "This is Consul Nareen of the Cerulean High Council. He insisted on meeting you personally." Graham set down his cup. "That sounds ominous." Nareen inclined his head with measured grace. "Mr. Foster, Miss Lara, the events of the past week have reached the capital. Your actions have created considerable turbulence within both human and cerulean governance." "Good," Graham said flatly. "Maybe that means people are finally paying attention." Nareen studied him, expression unreadable. "You risked much? Your life, your standing, your colony's stability, for someone not of your kind. Do you understand the political implications of what you've done?" Graham crossed his arms. "All I did was stop a man from killing his wife. And in doing so," Nareen said, his tone soft but sharp, "you've ignited a debate that has festered for generations." His gaze shifted to Lara. "Miss Lara, do you wish to file formal separation from your bondmate under joint jurisdiction law?" Lara straightened, her voice steady. "Yes, I renounce Drenvel and claim independent status under the Human Protection Act." The consul's nostrils flared slightly, the cerulean equivalent of surprise, before he nodded. "So be it, a brave declaration. But you must understand, such a precedent will not go uncontested." "Let them contest it," Graham said. "You can quote me in whatever report you're writing. I'm done watching decent people get crushed under other people's rules." Before Nareen could reply, the sharp whine of engines cut through the stillness. 3 armored transports were speeding toward the ranch, kicking up dust in violent spirals. Thrick barked an order, deputies moving to defensive positions. "That's not one of ours," he growled, drawing his stun batons. The consul turned sharply. "What is this?" Graham's stomach sank. He knew before he saw the insignia, Dren's crest, painted in black against white metal. "He's escaped custody," Lara whispered, horror dawning in her voice. The transports skidded to a halt, and figures in armored suits poured out, weapons drawn. Dren stepped forward from the center vehicle, his blue skin darkened with fury, his once smooth features twisted. "You thought you could humiliate me, human?" He shouted. "You thought you could take what's mine and live?" "Drenvel," Nareen's voice boomed, resonating with authority. "You stand accused of trafficking, assault, and treason against both your kind and this colony. Surrender now." Dren laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You old fool. Your council's decrees mean nothing to me." His gaze snapped to Lara. "You belong to me." He raised his blaster and fired. Graham moved before he could think, shoving Lara aside and taking the hit across his shoulder. Pain exploded through him like fire. He hit the ground hard, teeth clenched against the shock. Lara screamed his name, scrambling toward him, but before Dren could fire again, Thrick lunged forward, his forearms striking with blinding precision. The cerulean consul shouted orders as deputies opened fire, energy bolts cutting through the dust-choked air. Graham forced himself up, blood soaking his sleeve, vision blurring at the edges. Through the chaos, he saw Dren trying to retreat to his transport. He steadied his rifle one last time, every muscle trembling, and fired. The pulse shot hit true, slamming into Dren's chest. The cerulean stumbled, shock etched across his face, then collapsed in the dust. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun. Deputies moved to secure the mercenaries, the consul standing motionless amid the smoke. Lara dropped to her knees beside Graham, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his wound. "You stupid, stubborn human," she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Why would you do that?" He managed a crooked smile. Seemed like the right thing at the time. Medics arrived moments later, voices barking orders, but Graham barely heard them. His vision tunneled, the world fading into muted reds and golds. The last thing he felt was Lara's cool hand clutching his, her voice breaking as she whispered his name. When he woke hours later in the colony infirmary, his arm was immobilized in a medcast, and the faint hum of medical drones filled the room. Naren stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back. "He'll live," the consul said to Lara, who sat beside the bed, eyes red from crying. Then to Graham, he added, "For what it's worth, you've done more for interspecies law than 100 diplomats ever could." Graham tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Lara leaned close, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "It's over," she said softly. "Dren is in custody, alive, but stripped of all rank. The council has ruled. I am free." He let out a slow breath, something between relief and disbelief. "Good," he murmured. "That's all I wanted." But as he drifted back into uneasy sleep, he couldn't shake the thought that freedom, once won, was never easily kept. Somewhere deep in his bones, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the moment before the next storm, and this time, it wouldn't be fought with rifles, but with laws, with courage, with the quiet strength of two people who refused to bend. 6 months later, the Martian dusk fell soft and amber over the rebuilt ranch. The air within the Lyceum dome, warm with the hum of growth and laughter. The land that once stretched barren and silent was now alive with motion. Lights twinkled from the row of new prefab homes that lined the eastern ridge. Gardens of hybrid plants shimmered green under the nutrient lamps, and the wind carried the smell of cooked grain and ozone. The ranch had a new name now, though Graham still wasn't sure who had started calling it that. The Foster Sanctuary. The words had spread through the colony like wildfire, a banner whispered by humans and aliens alike, until it was official. What began as one man's stand had turned into a home for anyone caught between worlds. Graham leaned against the porch railing, his left arm still a little stiff from the injury, watching the colony's newest settlers unpack their meager belongings, 2 Vexian miners and a human woman with a baby, their faces equal parts fear and hope. They'd come after word reached the other domes that the rancher who had faced the alien syndicate now offered sanctuary for interspecies families, for outcasts, for anyone who had nowhere else to go. He had never planned to build a community, but once people started arriving, he couldn't turn them away. The same instincts that had made him pull Lara from the dust that first night kept him from closing his door to others. He'd built new modules himself, wiring lights and water systems, while the colonists pooled resources to expand the perimeter fence. And through it all, Lara had been the heart of it, organizing, teaching, calming. The timid housekeeper who once flinched at raised voices was now the quiet matriarch of a growing movement. She stepped onto the porch beside him now, dressed not in her old uniform, but in simple human work clothes. The sleeves rolled up, her braid tucked loosely over one shoulder. A silver ring gleamed on her finger, a human tradition she had insisted on embracing, though she'd modified it with a faint engraving in cerulean script. The words translated to, "Bound by choice, not by law." Her amber eyes softened as she followed his gaze over the settlement. "They've come a long way," she said. "We all have," he replied, his voice gravelly but gentle. She smiled, a small thing that still had the power to quiet his thoughts. "You still don't like being called a hero, do you?" "Heroes die," he said. "I just keep fixing fences." She laughed quietly and leaned against him. "You fixed more than fences, Graham Foster. You changed laws." He turned to look at her. "No," he said softly. "You did. You gave them something to believe in." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the noise of the camp faded. The months since Dren's arrest had been a blur, legal battles, consular hearings, the slow grind of bureaucracy. But through it all, the council's final decree had held, Cerulean females may declare independence under joint colony jurisdiction. The reform rippled outward across Mars and beyond, sparking debates on every world where human and alien settlements coexisted. Not everyone approved. There were protests, even threats. But the tide had turned. What had begun in blood and dust now had a heartbeat of its own. From below, children's laughter rang out, human and alien young playing together in the twilight. The sight hit him harder than he expected. He had seen colonies torn apart by fear and ignorance, soldiers turned to ghosts for less than what he had done. But this simple peace felt worth every scar. Lara watched them too, her expression full of quiet pride. "When I was bonded to Dren," she said softly, "I believed peace meant obedience. That to survive, I had to shrink smaller every year. But you taught me that peace can mean standing tall." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "And that love can mean freedom." Graham smiled faintly. "Guess we both unlearned a few things." A soft chime interrupted them. A courier drone descended from the sky, its lights blinking blue. It hovered beside the porch, extending a small projection panel. The holographic seal of the Earth Colonial Council shimmered to life above it. Lara's brows furrowed as she read the header. "It's official correspondence," she said. "From Earth itself." Graham tapped the message open, scanning quickly. His eyes widened slightly. "They're recognizing the sanctuary as an autonomous settlement," he murmured. "Under joint human-alien governance." Lara's mouth parted in disbelief. "That means—" "It means we're no longer just a ranch," he said quietly. "We're a precedent." Down in the settlement, word spread fast. Cheers broke out as colonists realized what the message meant. The humans hugged their alien neighbors, and the air filled with a chorus of languages blending together. Rough, melodic, beautiful. Lara turned back to him, eyes shimmering in the light of the sunset that bled through the dome's haze. "Do you realize what you've done?" She whispered. He shook his head, half smiling. "Not me, us." She laughed softly, then reached up to touch his face, tracing the faint scar at his jaw. "They'll write stories about you one day. The quiet rancher who defied an empire." He looked out over the glowing horizon, the dust swirling like gold mist. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather they remember this." He nodded toward the people below, families sharing food, children chasing lightbugs across the dirt. This is what matters. As night settled over the dome, they joined the others for dinner beneath the open sky. Music drifted from somewhere, a mix of human guitar and alien strings. The laughter was real, the warmth earned. Lara sat beside him, her head resting against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. The stars beyond the glass shimmered faintly, a reminder of the world he'd once fought in, and the one he'd chosen to build instead. "They called you quiet once," Lara said, her voice a soft murmur. "But you spoke louder than all of them." Graham chuckled, turning to kiss her temple. "Guess some things are worth the noise." And as the colony's lights glowed against the endless red desert, the rancher who once lived alone in the silence finally understood. Sometimes the smallest act of defiance could echo loud enough to change an entire world.